The
normally
weather.
Yeah,
Well,
we normally talk about that.
It's very dark outside because it's winter time,
still
and
winter.
Yeah, we don't see anything. It's very dark.
Bleak.
And a little bit rainy.
Well, I'm in Christchurch at the moment, so that's not my city. I'm actually down here for the anniversary weekend. I'm in a motel, and it's beautiful weather outside. Nice sunny day, not too windy, not too hot. So alhamdulillah, we're going to enjoy the day before I have to fly back to Auckland soon, probably another few hours, inshallah.
Nice.
Okay, I'll start inshallah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all the viewers. So alhamdulillah, today we have Brother Joram from, excuse me if I pronounce your name incorrectly, please correct me. We got Brother Joram from the Netherlands. He's a Dutch politician. He's very busy. It's election time at the moment in the Netherlands. And obviously we have Muhammad Thompson, who's always with us from Voice of Islam. And he's actually in Christchurch at the moment. So inshallah, so Muhammad Thompson, I just want to update to everybody a bit about what happened in Christchurch yesterday.
Yes, assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome for all those viewing in New Zealand and those from around the world. Currently in Christchurch, beautiful sunny day, Sunday morning. It's been very busy. I arrived here on Friday. Alhamdulillah, there's a lot of people around. Yesterday was some visiting to the graves and to the martyrs' graves. There was also some dua session in the Al Noor Mosque with the Prime Minister and many other dignitaries came, other politicians, and the main thing yesterday afternoon was a memorial where it was attended by many, and again the politicians, ambassadors, members of parliament and police chiefs, first responders, and it was a very moving event, and it touched the hearts of everyone who was there, non-Muslims as well. And today it's just more events happening, and then tomorrow there's the actual day. There's other events happening as well, and it's just a big buzz of people just trying to reconcile with the events, inshallah.
Inshallah. And obviously with us today we have Brother Joram. Most of you must have heard about Brother Joram. Brother Joram, would you like to explain a little bit about yourself, and then we will discuss why we invited you today.
Okay, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the organization for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here. I never spoke to an audience in New Zealand, so I hope you understand what I'm saying. Well, my name is Joram Faklava. I used to be a member of the PVV. It's the Freedom Party. It's the biggest anti-Islamic nationalist party in Europe. And it's the second party in the Netherlands, the country I'm from. I was the spokesman on the subject of Islam because that says enough, because it's a subject in the Netherlands nowadays. So when you talk about education, or you talk about defense, or the environment, there's also the subject of Islam nowadays. So that says enough when it comes to the climate and the way of thinking. And that's not only in the far right, but also with more leftist parties. So, to give you a little bit of an idea who I am, I was born and raised in Amsterdam. And the family I'm from was one of the last kind of Protestant families in Amsterdam, because the Netherlands is nowadays a very secularized country. But my family wasn't. I was baptized just like my brothers and sisters. My father read from the Bible before dinner, after dinner. We went to church. Well, the normal things practicing Christians do. That's what we did in our family. And I'm from a very orthodox, in a theological sense, a very orthodox Protestant denomination. It's called the Reformed Church, the old Reformed Church, as we say in the Netherlands. I was just being myself, and after I went to college, it was in 2000. 1, I went to university, and my first day at college was September 11. So of course, I had some ideas about Islam. It wasn't that my family taught me to hate Muslims or Islam or whatever. But when you looked into the theology of the Christian church I'm from, there was a lot of, well, I wouldn't call it hatred, but there were reservations when it comes to Islam. Because they said, well, it's not the true religion. It's a religion of false ideology. It's a religion of as they say, it's a false religion. And what I did was just accepting that, of course, because it was part of your tradition, part of your the way you were educated and raised. And when I went to university, of course, the first day was September 11, and I saw terrorist people blowing up the World Trade Center in New York. After that, there was a famous filmmaker in the Netherlands. His name is Theo van Gogh, and he was killed in the streets a few miles away from my old house. And his throat was slit in the streets. And after that, there was the bombings in Spain and in England and a lot of other countries. And so it confirmed the way I already thought about Islam. I said, well, okay, it's a false religion. Those people are crazy. Those people are very hateful. And that's what I see nowadays in the streets. And that's what I'm seeing in the news. When I was studying, we saw people from the Netherlands going to Syria, for example, to fight against Assad. But the people that went over to Syria, they called themselves jihadis. So there was again a confirmation of what I already thought about Islam. Okay, they like violence, they want to fight, they want to die for their religion. So I was strengthened in the way I was thinking about Islam. And at one point I thought, well, I have to stop this danger for the Netherlands, this danger for the West, and in fact, this danger for the whole world. Also Islamic countries, that well, those people are trapped in their religion. So what I did was looking at politics, and I thought, well, because when I want to stop this, we have to do it in the most effective way, and that's by law. And then I thought, well, there's one person who's very anti-Islam. He just split it from the party we were both members of, because when I was younger, I was already a member of the party that Geert Wilders, later a leader of the Freedom Party, was also a member. So when he left the party, I said, well, what's the reason he left? And a lot of people don't know that, but he left the party in 2004. And it was because he said, well, we don't want Turkey to be a member of the European Union ever. And there was a discussion in politics. Some people said, well, maybe they are partly European and they have a secular country, so they should be able to fit in the European concept. But there were, of course, a lot of people who said, no, that will never happen. And when they will be a member, they will, because there are 80 million Turkish people, and the biggest country in Europe is Germany with 88 million people. They said, well, they immediately become the second largest country of the European Union, and they're all Muslim. So that's a danger in a cultural sense, but also in theological sense. And one of the people was very against this idea of Turkey becoming a member of the European Union was Geert Wilders, and he was so anti that he said, well, if my party doesn't say they are against this, the option of becoming a member of Turkey, I will leave the party. And that's what he did. He left the party, and I thought, well, that's a guy. He's very strong. He's really against Islam because he left his old party. And then I wrote him a letter, and I said, well, you can come to my party, and that's the way I got in contact with Geert Wilders. And after a few years, he asked me, well, don't you want to be a member of Parliament? Want to be an MP? And I thought about it for a long time. Said, well, maybe it's better if I begin as like an assistant, and that's what I did. I became a policy maker for the party, and after a few years I worked there. They said, well, maybe you can become an MP now. And then I said, well, okay, I will. And because I studied comparative religion at university, I said, well, you can talk about Islam, you can defend our Christian heritage also in a theological sense in Parliament. So that's what I did, and I stayed there till 2014, 2015, and then I left the Freedom Party because there was an issue about Moroccan people, because he said, I want less Moroccan people in the Netherlands, or in general. And then I said, well, that's kind of strange because we are very anti-Islam, and I still was back then, but I wasn't against Moroccan people because there were Jewish Moroccan people, there were Christians, there were atheists. And I said, well, it's a little bit crazy to say all Moroccan people should leave the Netherlands because they are Moroccan. So I said, well, we have an issue now. And he said, well, this is what we think. And if you can live with our point of view, we have a problem indeed. So I said, well, then I'll leave the party. So I left the party, but I was still very anti-Islam in my head. So I said, well, I finally had the time to fulfill a long-held desire. And I was writing an anti-Islam book to explain why I thought that Islam was a danger for the Netherlands, for the West, and for the whole wide world. And so I started writing my book, but at one point I got so much information that was at odds with the things I always said about Islam that I thought, well, I have to be honest. When I'm writing this book, it should be correct, because otherwise a lot of people will say, well, it's a nonsense book, it doesn't make any sense, look at this and this source. So I said, well, I have to write some authorities when it comes to Islam, but also Christianity and Judaism, to make the book a correct book and a factual book. And one of the people I wrote was Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. He's a professor at Cambridge University in England. He's a convert or revert as well back in the 70s, so a long time ago. And I put a little Wikipedia link in my email because I thought, well, I have to be fair, so he doesn't get surprised when he looks at who is this guy. So and I didn't hear anything from him for I think about 6 or 7 weeks, and I thought, well, I will never hear from him again. But all of a sudden, one Saturday night, I got an extensive email from him. I think it was 17 pages on my telephone. And he answered a lot of my questions. And he said, well, if you want more information about this, you should look it up in this book. You can ask this person, you can ask that person. So he said, well, I understand where you're coming from, but it's not the correct way of approaching Islam as a religion. And it was the beginning of me, and to make it not too long, in the end, I got convinced of the concept of God in Islam when you compare it to Christianity. Because when I was, I think, about 16, 17 years old, I, of course, had some doubts about the concept of the Trinity. Because when I was small, we went to church. The father of one of my best friends was a preacher. In his church, they were praying to Jesus Christ as the Savior. But when I was back in my own church, they prayed to God the Father. So at one time I asked the minister, who am I praying to Jesus Christ or to God the Father? So it was a little bit confusing. Of course, when you're a teenager, you want to have an explanation. And I didn't get a real explanation, but in the end I said, well, maybe I just don't get it. And I accepted I was a Christian in a cultural sense, in a theological sense. I said, well, I don't have to think about it anymore. But when I was writing my book, those questions popped up again, of course, because I was saying Islam is a wrong religion, and I tried to explain why. But of course, you will talk about the concept of God as well then. And what struck me was that the concept of God in Islam, that Tawheed, was very clear, and it was very it hit me like so to say. So I got convinced of the fact that there is one God, and especially when you look at the Old Testament, let's say part 1 of the Bible. You see that the Jewish Bible, they say there is one God. And in the New Testament, part 2 of the Bible, the Christian Bible, at one moment there's someone asking Jesus, what is the most important thing when it comes to our religion? He says, well, there is one God. And that convinced me. I said, well, we see it in the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, we see it in the Christian Bible, and that's what Islam teaches us as well. So I thought, well, it's more logical But of course, I didn't like that because, well, okay, then I have something in common with Muslims, and that's a bad thing. And then I said, well, I was very glad that I still thought about the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, in a negative way. So I started, trying to find out who he was, what was his character, because, like I said in the beginning, the denomination of my church said, well, Islam is the religion of the Antichrist. So that makes Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, the Antichrist. So of course, when you're raised in that way and you learn to think that way, it's very hard to say, well, maybe I'm wrong, because it's the most extreme thing to think about someone. But I started reading, and one of the books I read was from Martin Links, The Life of the Prophet, based on the earliest sources. And of course, some books that Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad said, well, that they might be interesting for you to read when it comes to the character and the life of the Prophet. And at one time, I was so convinced about his moral character, so I couldn't say he's the Antichrist anymore. So, and then I thought, well, maybe he is a good person, but he's still not a prophet. And I said, well, so the Islam was still wrong. And then I thought to myself, well, how do I make sure that I know he's not a prophet? And there was a Christian preacher. He said to me, well, maybe you have to compare him with other prophets. And I said, well, I can compare him with Jesus Christ. And it's a funny thing, because the Christian preacher said, no, that's not a fair comparison. You have to compare him to Moses, because Jesus had another task. Because he said, well, Jesus wasn't a lawmaker, but Moses was, just like Muhammad was. He said, well, Moses started a community, just like Muhammad did. He said Moses was in an environment of conflict, of battle, just like Muhammad was. So he said that's not the case of Jesus. Jesus was more like in the Netherlands we say an ascete. He was on his own, so to say. He was more a spiritual leader, not so much a political leader. So I started comparing Musa to Muhammad, and I found out that the way there were so much similarities. And at one time I said, well, the way they differed in kind of, there was a difference between them. And one of the things they differed for was when it comes, for example, to war. Waging war, and that's not a nice topic, of course, but when you're in a very anti-Islamic environment, especially in a political sense, it's always an argument to say, well, Muslims are wrong because look at them, jihad, etc., etc. But I start comparing the way the Bible talked about waging war with the Quran. And in the Bible, there are passages that say, well, you have to kill all the soldiers, of course, you're in war. And I could, okay, that's logical. It's not nice, but it's logical. You're in war. But they say you have to kill the women, you have to kill the children, you have to even kill the babies, you have to kill all animals, you even have to burn all the grass and cut the trees. So what you say is wipe out the entire existence of the community. And when I compare that to the way Islam says, well, when you are waging war, again, that's not a nice thing to do, but it's unfortunately a part of who we are as a species. People are waging war. And it said, well, of course you can fight the soldiers, but you cannot do anything, for example, to the trees. You cannot cut trees. You cannot burn the grass, leave the animals alone. You cannot fight, for example, a monk or a priest. And I said, well, it's more human. And I was a little bit shocked to see that the Islamic way of waging war was more human than the Christian or Jewish way of waging war. And in the end, I thought, well, maybe when I compared him, and that's just one point, but I compared him, I think about on 8 points, and I said, well, he's not different than the others. So I had to say, well, or Moses isn't a prophet, or Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is a prophet as well. And I concluded the last thing. So I said, well, if I believe he is a prophet, and I already accepted the concept of God of Islam, that makes me de facto a Muslim. And I still didn't like it, because I said, well, it's impossible almost. So as someone who fought against Islam even in a professional sense, becoming a Muslim, it would be ridiculous. But in the end, yeah, I couldn't do anything else than accepting the fact that this is what it was. And then I became a Muslim. So that's the short version. I hope it's not too...
No, definitely. Jazakallah khairan. That's a beautiful story. So it's a journey. You wanted to prove that Islam is a bad religion, that Muslims are terrorists. So because of that, you put an effort rather than actually just go with what the media say. You wanted to write a book against Islam. So in order to write the books against Islam, you wanted to find facts. So because of finding facts, and then you go and research about it, and then you actually found that Islam is the truth. So this is the beautiful steps, and this is something that we encourage everyone to actually, if you think Islam said this, why don't you go and look it up? And this is what you've done, essentially, Brother Joram. I mean, you wanted to prove Islam is wrong, and you know that you want to write the right thing. You want to have the right sources, so you go to the right sources. You go and get the answers. So, by the way, I just wanted to acknowledge all the comments that came through. Jazakallah khairan to everyone. There's so many comments at the moment, so we were not able to go through all of them. And Jazakallah khairan for Brother Yusuf Chambers, our friend in the UK, who shared this feed. Now, that's Alhamdulillah. I think that's pretty much it. Muhammad Thompson, do you have any more questions for Brother Joram before we go to the second part about the Farad ideology?
No, it's a beautiful story, and it shows the honesty of the brother, where he wanted to write a book, but he didn't want to write it wrong or incorrectly. And alhamdulillah, because of that, his honesty, Allah showed him the truth and led him to Islam. And for that, we are all grateful, because now we have another brother within the fold of Islam who's able to share his story and be able to tell people, look, if you're looking for the truth, you just have to be honest with yourself. If you're just going to put your head in the sand and just say, well, this and this and this, you're not going to be successful, no matter what you do. You have to search for the truth in whatever you're doing, your work, your play, your this or that, and also in trying to find the truth on Islam and that. And it was a beautiful story, and love to hear more from you, inshallah.
Inshallah. So I think what we'll do now, we'll go to the second part. We talk about the Farad ideology. And the viewers, we are from New Zealand. So as I said before, Brother Muhammad Thompson is in Christchurch. And all of you must remember what happened March 15, 2019, where 51 of the Muslims were killed inside the mosque, inside two mosques, actually, Masjid An-Nur and Masjid Linwood. And 51 people were killed purely because they are Muslims. And subhanallah, they were killed while they were offering a prayer on Friday. So it's 14th of March. Tomorrow is will mark 2 years after the attack on the two mosques. And a week after the attack, Imam Jamal, who is the Imam from Masjid An-Nur, he gave a very, very beautiful khutbah. And he talked about the ideology of the Farah ideology. And subhanallah, his speech on that day, it's something open, it's an eyes opener for most of us. And I believe Muhammad Thompson yesterday, Imam Jamal did another khutbah about this topic. You just wanted to share what he said yesterday, just in summary, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. Yeah, Jazakallah. Yeah. I attended the Jummah prayer on Friday here, and Sheikh Jamal gave a khutbah, and he talked about hatred, racism, and the far right, and said there's no place for it in New Zealand, in Christchurch, in New Zealand, or in the world. And this is the sort of thing that we've got to, bring and stamp out. Any forms of hatred, any forms of racism, no matter against who. We have to just stamp that out, not just as Muslims, just as human beings, to live in a safe world where we can, have happiness and peace together. And it's not to do with freedom of speech or anything like this. This is just total hate speech, and we just need to stamp it out.
Okay. Barakallah fiqh. So so inshallah we'll go into this. Brother Joram, do you just want to start somewhere, because you were in that system, you were in the party politics, who I believe, from my understanding, the sole purpose was just to hate Muslims or to hate Islam. That's what I understand. I might be wrong. So if you just share your story, inshallah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it wasn't so much, well, what in the Freedom Party, and that's something that a lot of organizations in Europe and also in the United States, in Australia, New Zealand as well. I don't know that because I don't know of your political system that well. But in Europe, what they always do when it comes to parties, they make like say a cut between Islam and Muslims, and they say, well, we hate Islam, but we do not hate Muslims. And why is it that they do that? That's because otherwise you get in trouble with the law, because you cannot say something bad about people, but you can say bad things about ideologies, about concepts, about ideas, of course, because that's the freedom of speech. So it's a way of trying to make sure you do not get in trouble with the law. And also because in the Netherlands, the Freedom Party said at one time in 2009, they said, well, we don't see Islam as a religion anymore. We see it as an ideology. And why is it that they say that? Because, of course, in the Netherlands, and it counts for most of the Western countries in the world, you have freedom of religion. And when you say we want to close, and that's what I did, I tried to close all Islamic schools in the Netherlands. I said, well, we have to try to ban the Quran. We have to shut down all mosques. We have to make sure there is no Muslim immigration anymore to Europe. And a lot of other countries, a lot of other parties in parliament said, well, this discrimination, you're discriminating those people. And I said, well, I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the idea of Islam. And I said, what do you mean? And I said, well, that's the concept. We don't see it as a religion. It's an ideology. It's a political ideology. And it was very hard till this day for other parties to say, well, that's not the case. It's a religion, because I just, as a spokesman of the party, I said, I just denied the fact that it was a religion. And it wasn't so much because of the fact that, of course, Muslims believe in a God. There's a heaven, a hell, a holy book, etc. But I said, no, it's a political system. And the only reason we said that is it's not a theological thing. It's just because in a political way, we can go around the law. So it makes it for anti-Islamic organizations, politically or not politically, it makes it easy to target Islam and, in that sense, target Muslims. So that's it's a very important thing to be aware of. And well, so we always said we don't hate Muslims, we hate Islam. And why did we hate Islam? Well, we said, well, it's almost a way of living that's contrary to the way we think in the West. It's always the other with a capital O. When it comes, for example, to women, they say, well, we love women to be, for example, wearing the dresses they want, doing the things they want. Muslims don't like that. So they are exactly the opposite of who we are. We like freedom of speech. You can insult people, you can make jokes, etc. They don't. They're exactly the opposite of who we are. When it comes, for example, we have individualism. We look at ourselves as an individual, not as a collective, as a part of a collective. They do. They're exactly the opposite of who we are. So Muslims and Islam is always the other, and that's not something that's new. It has been part of Europe all along, not with the same way of reasoning and the same arguments, because the arguments change, but that they are the other. That's always been part of who we in Europe were as a Christian part of the world. And of course, there are a lot of there has been a lot of clashes between, for example, the Ottoman Empire and the north of Africa and Europe. So especially when you look at Eastern Europe, for example, countries like Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, Romania, they had been colonized by the Turks, by the Ottoman Empire. So what they said is, well, they are Muslims. It was the last caliphate. So they said, well, it's an Islamic problem. They are like imperialists for us. So they said, well, we have to keep them out. And that's still in the West. That's of course not the same, because we never have been a part of the Ottoman Empire. But they always said, well, look at what happened to Eastern Europe. We had to fight the Turkish people. We had to fight, and Turks was a synonym for Muslim. So they said, well, we have to fight the Muslims. So that's one part of it. The other, another reason is, of course, terrorism nowadays. Like I said, especially in northwestern of Europe, there's the Christian denomination of the Protestant Church. It is very anti-Islam. When you look at, for example, Martin Luther, the founder, so to say, of Protestant Church in 1517, he split from the Catholic Church. He wrote several books about the Turks, and he wasn't talking about Turks in an ethnic way, but in a religious way. So he said Turks are Muslims. They believe in a false god. They pray to, etc., etc. So that's part of our tradition as well. And a lot of people are not aware of the fact that the anti-Islam sentiment is so deep in our culture, and we can explain it, but it doesn't make it right. And it's wrong both in an intellectual way, but also in a historical way. Because, for example, I don't know if you have that in Europe. We have a bread. It's called the croissant. It's a bread shaped in a half moon. A lot of people don't know that the croissant was invented, so to say, in 1683. And when you look, for example, the rifle that the terrorist guy who killed all those innocent people in the mosque, he wrote some numbers on the rifles, and one of the numbers was 1683. And 1683 refers to a battle between the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims, and Europe. And Europe won. And there's also a website, a very anti-Islamic website in the United States. It's called Gates of Vienna, because the war back then was fought in Vienna, in Austria. So it's referring to clashes and tensions between Islam and the West. And in 1683, after the Ottomans were defeated, because the Ottoman Empire lost that battle, the people from Austria and France, because a lot of people from France were fighting as well, they shaped breads in the shape of a half moon. And they said, well, we break this bread to show people we break the half moon, we break Islam, and then they eat it. So, and that is not, of course, it's not that I say let's boycott the croissant, of course, but it's to show that in a cultural sense, that the way of thinking about Islam is very negative, and it's in our culture. And that's something that political parties like my old party, Freedom Party, they know history very well, and they know that they can call on these feelings. And people are not aware. They just think, okay, there was something about Turkish people, there's something with Muslims and Islam that's not correct. And then we see terrorist attacks and said, well, I think those guys are right. So that's the mechanism in parties like my old party, and they exploit it to make political gains for themselves to get in power.
Well, I just wanted to add about the we got a few comments. We got some comments from New Zealand, and I think from the New Zealand perspective, to our viewers who are from overseas, in New Zealand, despite what happened in Christchurch, we keep saying this again and again from Voice of Islam team. We keep saying that the people in New Zealand in general are good people. We have no problems. And in fact, this year, we even put up billboards to say thank you to New Zealand, to people in New Zealand, for how they responded to the attack in Christchurch. So now, just a few comments there. I just wanted to be very, very clear. So in New Zealand, it's not like, strong far right and things like that. It's always going to be one or two. And I see this, Joram, I'm not sure from your perspective, but we tend to see this a bit more after I'm not sure if it's after or whether it's the time, because it seems to be related to when Trump got into power as well. So somehow that's related. And I don't know, Mama Thompson, anything else you want to say on that?
No, I just want to reiterate the situation in New Zealand. I'll recall you were there that day as well. The week after the mosque attack, the Friday prayer was held on Hagley Park, which is right across the road from the mosque. There was 5,000 Muslims there and 15,000 non-Muslims there cheering on. They were all there in lines like they were our guardians during the prayer, and many of the sisters were, non-Muslims were wearing hijab. The world media was there. The Prime Minister was there wearing hijab, and it was just that love and care and kindness and thing that was there. And this is how New Zealand reacted, and this is was I think a shock to the world how because other events happen and nothing really goes like this, and the amounts of flowers and well-wishing and things like that were just unbelievable, and I was just so proud to be living in New Zealand even in a tragic time like this.
So I guess, Joram, so when you start learning about Islam, and obviously you already have these preconceived ideas about Islam hate the others, and you talk about how your party utilized that emotions with what happened with the Turks and all that. What do you see when you see from Islamic perspective, and how do when you were researching about it, how do Muslims see people of other faith or different faith, and how do you differentiate, or would you explain that, what happened, and how a Muslim felt people of other faith, and how Muslim actually behave to that, and how do you explain the event that happened between the Turks and then the Europe, for example?
Sorry, the last part I didn't hear because I think a technical problem or something. I saw your mouth.
Sorry.
But
Right. So I'll just say it again. So what happened in Europe? You say the war between the Ottoman and the Eastern Europe, and how that has been used to see how they are against Islam. But when you learn about Islam and what happened, how do you reconcile those ideas from the Muslim perspective and from the European perspective, from your previous party's perspective on that issue? Yeah.
Okay, that's clear. Well, of course, and I want to add something that Mohammed Thompson talked about. Of course, not most of the people, I think about 80-90% of the European people, especially in the Netherlands, but also other countries in Europe, don't hate Muslims, don't have any problem with Islam. But there is a small part, and it's gaining political power. And that is hateful, and they have problems with Muslims. They have problems with Islam as a religion, but of course, majority doesn't. Thank God. But it's a cultural thing, and like I said, it's not that people are aware of it, but when people start talking about the past, it's very easy to persuade people to say, well, look at Islam nowadays. Look at the terrorist attacks. That's something they do. We don't do that. They do that. So it's like they're misleading people, and they point to a false history, because that's your question. After I start, of course, reading and learning about the Islamic perspective on those events. I also saw, for example, in 1683, the war that the terrorists pointed to on his guns. It was fought by a lot of people from Europe. They united to fight against the Ottoman Empire. And one of the people, and that's something that you see in far-right literature as well, is Jan Sobieski. It's a Polish general. And when you look at far-right literature again, everybody knows this person because they say, well, he was the guy in charge when it comes to fighting the Turks in 1683 at the gates of Vienna. He fought and he defended Europe. But the funny thing is, and that's what I learned when I was searching and I was looking for answers when it comes to my own book, after they defeated the Turks, he gave some people who fought with him some rewards. And he said, one of the groups that fought with me were Muslims. There was a Muslim group fighting against the Ottoman Empire, and the other way around, because the Protestant church, my denomination, was in those days was seen as they were seen as heretics by the Catholic Church, and the clash wasn't about Christianity and Islam. It was about territory, and it was about power, and it was about politics. But they used religion, and what you saw is that some Christians, especially Protestants, fought against the Christian Austria with the Turks, with the Ottoman Empire, and the other way around. There were groups of Muslims fighting with Austria, and there were groups of Protestant Christians fighting with the Ottoman Empire, with the Turks against Austria. So it wasn't that black or white. It was very diffuse, and it wasn't about religion at all, because otherwise some Muslims wouldn't fight against the Ottoman Empire and the other way around. But Jan Sobieski, the guy in charge on the European side, after they won, he said, well, we have to praise the people who made sure that we won several battles, and those were Muslims. So he built mosques in Europe for those people. So the guy who was so loved by extreme right, by populists, anti-Islam, is someone who built mosques in Europe for the Muslims. So that's something very, it's very, very funny, and it's kind of ironic to see that people say, well, it's a hero, yeah. And he said, well, we have to honor those people. We have to honor their religion as well. So it isn't that black or white, and that's something to answer your question. I found out after I, of course, accepted that reality was a little bit different than I thought it was. And there are so many stories like this, and that it reshapes the way you think. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't know these stories. And but I think it's very important, because it gives you a new perspective on a reality back then, and especially now.
Well, I find it's amazing. Mama Thompson, do you want to add on that?
Yeah, it's unbelievable, but it's also, it's like that book that was put out about fallen heroes, about the how certain battles in the First World War were won with the help of Muslims, and only by the Muslims were the only ones who were actually from North Africa and places like that, who actually, through their hard work and ability to fight well, won the battles for them. And these sort of stories aren't told. You know, they're not told and openly told. And it's just like what you're talking about now in that battle of 1683. You know, you go find the truth and you find it's something totally different. And it's usually always back to greed, money, land, and not about clashes of civilization, as people trying to make it out to be.
Yeah. Joram, I think you probably ought to answer one of the questions there from Anna. She says, Assalamu alaikum from Catalonia. Joram, how do you think we Europeans can change the image of Islam in Europe? What would be your answer to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, a lot of people always say, especially when you look at the far right, they say Islam isn't part of Europe. It has never been part of Europe, and it will never be a part of Europe. But of course, especially when you're from Spain, when you look at the south of the country of Spain, there's Andalusia. And Andalusia, for over 800 years, it was, of course, a Muslim territory. And it was one of the greatest civilizations there has been in the old days. And there were a lot of people, Christian people, Jewish people, Muslim people, of course, who worked together. They gave humanity, so to say, a beautiful example of how to live together. They did some extraordinary things when it comes to science, to culture, stuff like that. So I think it's very important that we show people through history. So you cannot say, if you're honest, that Islam has never been part of Europe. It has always been part of Europe. And one of the things I always say, and probably you know this story, a lot of people say, well, the Dutch founded New York in America. And that's true. The Dutch people founded New York. It used to be New Amsterdam, of course. But what a lot of people don't know is that, and it's a short story, so I hope I have time. But there was a guy. It's called. His name is Jan Janszoon. It means Jan, son of Jan. So his father was called Jan as well, and he was from Haarlem, the Dutch Haarlem, in a very small place in the Netherlands. And it's about in like so to say 1600, so centuries ago. And he was what we call in Dutch a kaapvaarder. And that means he got permission from the state, from the government, to rob other ships from the Spanish Empire, from the British, from the French, etc. And those countries did the same. So it was a normal thing, so to say, back then. But at one time, his ship was shot, and he almost died. But he went and he swam to Canary Islands near Spain. But it's between Spain and North Africa. It's in near the coast of Morocco. And when his ship was laying there on some rocks, and he was crawling on the beach, he saw a group of people. He said to him, "Well, you're captives now, so you can choose whether how you die, or if you buy your own freedom again." So he said, "Well, we see your ship, you have a lot of gold and silver, so you can buy your freedom if you want to. Or you can fight us, that's an option as well, but you are alone, we are with 250 people, so I don't think that's a very rational thing to do. Or you can swim back home." But of course there were sharks, and you would never. And he said, "The last option is you become a Muslim." And then he said, "What is a Muslim? I don't know what a Muslim is," because it's 1600. And of course, he had heard some stories, but he didn't know what it was. So they explained to him what a Muslim was. And he said, "Well, then I already am a Muslim." And I said, "Well, alhamdulillah, come aboard and join us." So he became a member of the group. And he was so successful that in the end, he became president of a town in Morocco called Saleh. So there was a Dutch guy, the first president of Saleh. It's a small town. It still exists, but it was like Singapore back then. It's like a country in a country. And the Sultan of that place said, "Well, you can be a president, and you did a lot of good things for us, so we love you, etc." And then he married a girl from Morocco. They got children. He converted. His name was Murad Reis. He called himself Murad Reis. That was his Muslim name. And one of his sons, Anthony Janszoon of Saleh, because they were from Saleh, he said, "Well, you have to go to the New World. You have to go to New Amsterdam, and you have to bring them, for example, a Quran. The first Quran there was brought by Anthony Janszoon of Saleh, the Dutch Moroccan guy, the son of Jan Janszoon. And he went there. And one of the places, of course, people know the Bronx from rap songs and stuff like that. But the Bronx was founded by this guy. This guy, Jan Janszoon's son, Anthony Janszoon van Saleh, founded the Bronx. So, and this was in, I think, 1629. So it was before the United States became the United States. It was still British back then. So there were already Muslims, and not as slaves, but as very rich, important people there. And because he was one of the richest people, because his father was very rich. When you translate it to the monetary system of nowadays, you would say he was a billionaire. And he said, "Well, buy some land, build it, etc., etc." And so a big part of New Amsterdam, New York, was built by this Dutch Moroccan Muslim guy called Anthony Janszoon from Saleh. So what I always say is, when people say, "Well, Islam isn't part of the West," it is, because of course Andalusia, but also when you look at the United States of America was for the most important city New York, was for a big part founded by a Muslim guy. So Islam is in the center of the West. So I think it's very important, to answer the question, to make sure that people know history and they know what really happened. So there isn't a clash of civilizations. There isn't something you cannot reconcile or whatever. It's just part of who we are as Europeans or Americans or people from the Middle East. It's all intertwined, and it's very important, I think, to know, especially when it comes to Europe.
I think there's one more question there. Maybe we'll get Mama Thompson in this as well. Mama Thompson, why do you think there's a difference? Joram might correct us this, because Joram have said there are many European also who supported Muslims, who happy to have Muslims as their neighbors, as their friends. Why do you think there was such a huge difference in terms of the New Zealand, the way how the New Zealand respond to the attack, and how some parts of Europe would have responded to the attack? Why do you think that's the case here, Mama Thompson, for New Zealand?
I think it's because, like, in New Zealand, it's such a small country, quite compact, very multicultural. New Zealand's been, accepting of multicultural, people from different nationalities, different ethnic backgrounds, beliefs, and that for many, many, many years. And I think the way the Muslims reacted first after the incident, the terrorist attack, where they showed forgiveness, compassion, and things like that, that then the Kiwis mirrored that, and more so. They came back, and with the leadership at the time, the Prime Minister and the other people, and showed the care and that for everyone, and how the Kiwis just seem to have that natural ability to show kindness, and they came and basically wrapped themselves around us. And some of the stories people had with neighbours came to the people's house just straight after the attacks and sort of stood guard. They made rings around the mosques and said, "We'll protect you." Some of the local Maori organisations and that came and said, "We'll protect you as well." So we had all this sort of outpouring of because they couldn't believe this could happen in New Zealand. And alhamdulillah, many of them say, "Oh, see, it wasn't even in New Zealand it did. It was an import from Australia." So, and I think this closeness in New Zealand, because it's so small, so everyone knew someone who knew someone, had a contact with what happened there and things like that. So it was so close, and it was just such a beautiful awakening or happening after such a terrible terrorist attack.
Okay, sorry. So Joram, when you hear about what happened in Christchurch, and you hear about what happened in New Zealand, how do you what happened in the Netherlands? I mean, how did the people in Netherlands responded to that? And also, just share a few things. When we were doing a tour last year throughout New Zealand, and we actually went to a small place at one of the towns in New Zealand, and they were mentioned about how some young children actually got attracted to this ideology of far right through games, online gamings and everything. And so I just wanted to, from your side, how was the Europe respond to what happened in New Zealand, and what would be your last few advice dealing with these topics, these far right issues? What would your advice is, and what do you think we should do from the Muslim perspective and those who are not yet understand much about Islam? Yeah.
Well, of course, when the news was there in the Netherlands, everybody was shocked as well. I think just like you guys, of course, most of the people were horrified by the idea that someone with a gun shoots 51 people into mosques for no reason. It's ridiculous. It's a sick thing. And most of the Dutch people and also people from Germany, Italy, France, of course, they felt the same horror in their hearts when they looked at the images and they saw the horrible thing that happened there, the terrorist attack. So that's something. I think it's a human response when you see people get slaughtered, especially innocent people. It's very hard to watch, and you see them grieve, etc. So that's a very hard thing to see. But when you look at the far right, for example, a lot of people didn't react at all. They said, "Of course, we don't like it. It's not the way it should be." But there were even people from far right organizations, not in politics, but organizations outside of politics, said, "Well, that's the way it will be if immigration grows in Europe. We will have attacks like this as well." And you already had some attacks also in the Netherlands, not like this, of course, because this was very extreme. But we see, for example, mosques in the Netherlands. They put some swastikas, the sign of Adolf Hitler's party on mosque. They throw in windows. They write things on them. They attack, especially girls with hijabs and stuff like that. So that's something that happens often in the Netherlands, and that's something that's very worrying because it's growing, and not only in the Netherlands. You see it also in England, for example. You see it in France. You see it in several countries. But I think that's one, and I don't know how it is in New Zealand, of course. But one aspect of this issue, especially in Europe, and especially in the northern west of Europe, is secularization. Because in the old days, a lot of people could understand religious feelings and sensitivities. But nowadays, most of the people, like I said in the small talk we had before, in the Netherlands, for the first time since 2016, there was a research group that said, well, it's for the first time in history that there are more atheists than theists in the Netherlands. And of course, in a sociological sense, there's no issue at all, of course. But when you look at the way people see religion and they understand religion and they can relate to people who are religious, that is a big problem because they don't know any sensitivities when it comes to God or holy people or books, etc. And so the way they use, especially far right people, they use freedom of expression to insult other people. And for example, you see Muslims get hurt or angry or whatever emotions they feel, and you see it in the media. They say, "What are those people are doing? They just say that their book is stupid or their God doesn't exist or something." And atheist people, especially when you are raised in a context and a culture that is very almost anti-religious in general, not only anti-Islam but also anti-Christianity, anti-God, so to say. It's very hard to talk to people who say, well, we don't have anything with God. Why do you believe in a fairy tale? And when I insult, for example, the tooth fairy, you won't be mad, but now you are mad. It's just the same. And it's very hard. And that's something in the Netherlands, but also in the West, especially in Europe, that's growing. The distance between people who are religious and have religious feelings and people who are almost anti-religion, and not to say we are against religion, but they don't know religion. So when somebody gets upset about things people say about their religion, they really do not understand why people are mad. And that's something that far-right organizations, they use this emotion of not knowing the feelings of the other person, the lack of empathy and understanding, so to say. And it's a big problem as well. So again, I don't know how it is in New Zealand, but when you see that a country is secularizing in a very fast way, the distance between religious people and non-religious people starts to grow as well. And that's something to worry about.
That's I think I mentioned this to you before. What you said is the same thing happened in New Zealand, and if I remember that correctly, in 1998, about 75 to 77% of the people in New Zealand believe in God or follow some sort of religion, and in 2018, only about 33% or 34%, if I remember the statistic correctly. So that's within 20 years, it dropped by half. And majority of them, like you said, Brother Joram, before, they're what we call agnostic. They sort of, believe in something, but not really sure and don't really follow anything. So a very interesting point. So, from what you said is basically, for us, the Muslim, we should probably work alongside people of other belief or other religions and some sort of work together on this issue. And in the past, as you said before, from our experience, the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews, we used to live together happily, and we used to be alongside each other. And Jerusalem, a few other places that you mentioned before in Europe. There's one question there that I thought would be quite interesting, given that we talk about this, and I think we probably should end soon. It's taking too much of your time now. Just a little bit about the niqab and the hijab in Europe, and France banned niqab, and I understand Switzerland also banned the niqab as well. And is that correct? Why do you think they were doing this, and what was the benefit for this? Is it the peoples that will benefit from this, or would that be the politicians? Because I found it is interesting, because I think it was in Switzerland recently when they were counting the ballots in about how many wanted to ban the niqab, and those who were counting the ballots, they were wearing the mask, and which I thought, they look like they're just wearing a niqab themselves. So any from your perspective about why this is happening in Europe, why it's a big issue for people to wear niqab?
Yeah, well, it is an issue. It's a big issue. In the Netherlands, they banned niqab as well, partly. When you go into, example, a bus or a train, or you want to go to the city mall or the city hall, they say, well, it's forbidden to enter with a niqab. And in the Netherlands, they did a research, and there are only 200 people wearing a niqab. And we have 17 million people, so it's ridiculous that to make a law for 200 people, and most of the time those people aren't even participating in the same sense that people who are not wearing a niqab. For example, when it comes to jobs or stuff like that, most of the people just say, "Well, we don't want to work in that system. We just leave us alone. We work at home, etc., etc." So, but if they want to go buy, for example, groceries or whatever, it's almost impossible nowadays, because they say, well, it's forbidden by law now. But of course, because of coronavirus, it's a strange situation, because you have people who wear hijab and they have to wear I don't know how to say it in English, a mask for your mouth.
Mask. Yes.
So basically, they're wearing hijabs, or they're wearing a niqab. So, and that's an issue now in politics as well. But why are they doing it? Well, in Switzerland, of course, there was it's the same party as the Freedom Party in Switzerland. It was the second party in Switzerland as well. When they changed law there, they call it this, when you translate it, the Schweiz, so to say, the People Party of Switzerland. And it's the same party as the Freedom Party in the Netherlands. You have a party called Swedish Democrats. It's the same party as we have, but then in Sweden. And you have those parties, Lega Nord. That's one of the biggest parties in Italy. And they work together, Front National from Marine Le Pen. It's the second party in France. And they're all working together in the European Parliament now. So there's one big anti-Islam party now in the European Union. And so they copy paste each other's ideas when they say, well, does that work in Belgium, for example? Well, we do it in Sweden. If does this work in Sweden, we do it in Switzerland. In Switzerland, we do it in Italy, etc. So they copy paste the ideas of each other all the time. And it's the same way of thinking. They say Islam is not part of Europe. Everything that looks Islamic when it comes to, for example, mosques or minarets or headscarves or niqabs or the Quran or halal food, for example, because there's and that's something that's very worrying as well. There has been a case in the European Union. There is the highest lawmaker of Europe. So we have your own national laws, but you can always go to European law. And European law is over national law. But there was, in Belgium, for example, they said, well, halal food is forbidden. And then some people said, well, that's ridiculous. We have freedom of expression, we have freedom of religion, so we can do what we want with our meat, of course. And then they started to go to the court, the European court. And the European court said, the lower court said, well, you are right, you have freedom of religion, but the state of Belgium went to the higher court, and the higher court now said, and you cannot go against it. So that's the final issue. They said, no, you can ban. So it's forbidden now. There is a European legislation that said you cannot eat halal food anymore, and that will be implemented in Belgium. But if it's implemented in Belgium, there has to be one or two parties in the Netherlands or France or whatever country, all the people and all the countries that are part of the European Union, they can say, well, there's the law. It's a European law. We want that law here as well, implemented here as well. So I think it's about maybe a year or 2 years, and it will be a very big problem in the European Union overall to eat halal food, for example. So it's part of a bigger way of thinking and a bigger development in Europe, and that's very anti-religion, but especially anti-Islam.
Okay. Well, that's interesting from my perspective. Jazakallah khairan, Brother Joram. I think it's coming to the end now, and we'll conclude this soon. Oh, there's a question there. What about the kosher food? Will that be the same as well in Europe, since they banned the halal food?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because of course I was a member of the Freedom Party, and the Freedom Party has good ties with the Jewish community, with people from Israel, and they always said we have to defend Judeo-Christian heritage, and that's something you hear all the time when you look at France or England or Germany or the Netherlands. The populist parties always talk about the Judeo-Christian heritage we have to defend against Islam. That's what I said in the beginning. Muslims are always the other with a capital O. So if we are Judeo-Christian, they are Muslim, and they are something else. We don't know what, but they're wrong and they're something else. So in the party in 2011, so that's almost 10 years ago, I was in Parliament, and in Parliament there was the issue of kosher food. Is it to be banned, just like halal food? And because we were a very pro-Jewish/Israeli party, there were people said, no, we cannot do that. It's our Jewish friends, and we make it hard for them to eat the food they want to eat. But in the end, they said, well, inside of the party was a discussion. In the end, Geert Wilders, the leader, said, well, the most important thing is to ban Islamic food, halal food, and that's the most important thing. And it's so to say, collateral damage if we hurt the Jewish community as well. And that's something you hear in other communities as well, anti-Islamic communities, populist communities. They say, well, we don't care. And I think that's why I mentioned it before. That's because of the secularization. They don't care about religion in general anymore, and whether they are Jewish and our Jewish friends, we like them, etc., etc. What the most important thing is, we are anti-Islam. That's who we are. And that's why they banned it. And of course, there were a lot of people inside of the party, but also outside of the party, people who supported the Freedom Party. They said, well, we cannot support you anymore because you banned kosher food as well. And I said, well, don't support us then. We do it without you. So that's a very strong, it's a very strong emotion inside of those parties. It's really anti-Islam. Geert Wilders once told me the only reason I founded the Freedom Party is to fight Islam. That's it. That's the core issue.
Well, I think, subhanAllah, Jazakallah khairan, that's an eye-opener for me as well, to hear that. So, you know, they're willing to even put down their own allies just to stop Islam somehow. So I think we're coming to an end now, inshallah. Muhammad Thompson, is there anything else you wanted to say? And then we'll pass to Brother Joram to conclude our program today, inshallah.
I'm just wondering what's so scary about us Muslims, that they're spending that much energy and concentration on, and even to destroy their allies to try and get rid of us. It's subhanallah, but they'll never win. They'll never win. They keep trying all they like, but they'll never win. Inshallah, while Allah's with us, we're on the path. They'll never win.
Inshallah. So you want to conclude now, Muhammad Thompson, and then we'll pass to Brother Joram. I think from my side, I'll conclude first. What I learned from the talk today is education, 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 and we also need to learn our history. And I keep saying this again and again. The Muslims as well need to learn the history, and the people who are not understand Islam also need to learn the history. I think when you learn the history, like how Brother Joram, he wanted to go and learn and find out the truth and why this is happening and research into it, and he found the truth. And it's interesting to hear about the guy who being supposed to be the guy who the real far right, the one that the far right's very proud of, turned to be a guy who also built mosque for the Muslims. So that's an eye-opener for me. And so Jazakallah khairan. I'll pass it to Muhammad Thompson, and then we will get Brother Joram to conclude, inshallah. Muhammad Thompson, last few words.
Yeah, most of the words have been said, but what I'd say is for the Muslims, we just need to be the best example of our religion. You know, just be the best example, you know, and talk about the education, and, you know, be the best example and be out and seen, be proud to be Muslims, and, you know, be thankful to have the religion we have, and alhamdulillah in New Zealand, be thankful we have what we have here, the freedoms. You know, the COVID is very little here and things like that, and alhamdulillah, we just have to be thankful for that, and pray for, you know, all those who are suffering from the tragedies here and throughout the world. Thank you everyone for watching. So,
inshallah. Brother Joram, yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you for beautiful words, and I think it's very important to try to live the Sunnah. That's I think the core issue. If you try to imitate the best example, then you cannot be wrong in the way you behave, the way you talk, the way you are as a person, and that persuades people. Maybe not immediately, but in the end they see, well, this is a good person. He's someone with a high moral character, and that's very important. And I want to conclude with an ayat from Surah 22. I think because that was something that struck me when I was writing my book. Because of course, in the end, I saw what I saw when it comes to the information. I saw the concept of Islam as being more logical. I saw the way the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, acted and was as a person. But I still didn't want to be a Muslim. And in the end, there was this surah, and I just looked it up, and it was it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts. And that surah that kept going on in my head, and that's something that is really true, because you can see it with your eyes, but you still don't want to see it with your heart. And as long as that is the case, there's nothing. So we can educate, we can show people the truth, but in the end, it's Allah who changes people, because it was really overnight with me. I finished my book, so to say, and I said, well, okay, de facto I am a Muslim, but I don't want to be a Muslim. And then, and it sounds a little bit crazy, but some books fell out of my shell here. That's the bookshelf, and there were some books, and one of those books was the Quran. And when I picked it up, I saw that ayah again, and I already saw it a few times, and I saw it again, and said, "It's not the eyes that are blind, but the heart." And then I was like, "Yeah, that is what it is," because I know I can see, I can read, but I don't want it. And I thought, what is this? It's almost like something is withholding me from becoming a Muslim. And then I said, well, and then I did a little prayer, not to the Islamic God, but I said, in general, I said, well, I believe in God, and if there is a God, show me the way. And when I woke up, I felt very strong in my heart, and I said, well, I am a Muslim. And then I told my wife, and I told my mother, etc. And still, it wasn't that very nice to do, but I had the power to do. So I think it's very important for us to realize that education is very important, and I think the character of the Prophet should be the only example we have to show people Islam, because what they say, the Quran, that Muhammad, peace and blessing, was the Quran. So the way he acted, the way he did, the way he moved, etc. That's all we can do. And I think I truly believe in my heart that when people act that way, people cannot deny Islam. Of course, they still can deny, just like I did in the beginning. But in the end, it's too strong of a force, and it will persuade you if you are honest and open. So, inshallah, it changes a lot.
Inshallah. I mean, Jazakallahu khairan. So to all those viewers, and thank you for all the comments, and wa alaikum salam to all those who say salam to us. I'm really sorry we could not respond to it. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. It's an eye-opener to myself, and I learned something that I've never known before. So Jazakallahu khairan to Mama Thompson, live from Christchurch at the moment, and Jazakallahu khairan to Brother Joram, all the way from Holland, Amsterdam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.